chapter 10 of Being Time. Whose time is it anyway? As long as time, this is Dogen, as long as time is not a modality of going and coming, that time on the mountain is the immediate present right now, of the time being time. Yet as long as time takes upon itself a modality of going and coming, the being in me, in the immediate now of the time being, is being time. So does not the time climbing the mountain or crossing the river swallow up the time of the splendid vermilion palace? Does not that time spit out this time? So, well, let's start with that vermilion palace. What color is that, vermilion?
It's orange.
Orange. Okay.
Orange, red.
So I guess that's kind of a royal color. And this vermilion palace is a reference of some idea we have of enlightenment, that we're going to live at ease with someone peeling our grapes and fanning us, because we've become these enlightened beings. So basically, any idea that we have of enlightenment that is separate from this moment right here, right now, is this vermilion palace. And basically, the reality of getting up and getting dressed and walking down the street, oh, that's the color?
This is vermilion.
A lot of the temples in Japan are this color.
Oh, they are.
Exactly.
Vermilion.
Yeah, it's
Kirk's enlightenment.
yeah.
All right. So, so that basically getting up and doing everyday things basically swallow up this idea of the vermilion palace, because getting up and doing everyday things, chop water, carry wood, ordinary mind, the koans have been telling us this, the sages have been telling us this all along, that it's not this special, separate, highfalutin, magical, levitating thing. It's your life, just as it is right here, right now, at this time. And what this practice is all about is really deconstructing any belief that creates separation. Somebody coming in? And I love the analogy of the moon that she borrows from a lot of Zen texts. The moon is often referenced as a metaphor for enlightenment, because the moon is always, this is always the moon. It's always full. Now we see the moon in these sequentially, coming, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then getting smaller, smaller, smaller. And then there are a few days of the month in which we can't see the moon at all, the dark of the moon. And we perceive that time is the same sequential, phenomenon. But the moon is always the same size. It is always this big round orb orbiting the Earth. And it's kind of interesting that we only see one side of it. So it's synchronous orbit all the way around. So there's only, that's all that we see. But that's what it is. It isn't that. I guess probably at some point in our history, people would say, or people would believe, that the moon would get bigger and then get smaller depending on where it was. But that's not true. This is our perception of it is that it happens sequentially. Just as our perception of time is that it happens from some point in the past and goes to some point in the future, and that hopefully we are at one stage in the past and we get better as we get to the future, and that all of that is really delusional. That we are enlightened just as we are right here, right now, in this time, and we are time itself. All of time is coalescing, just in this moment, in this eternal now, as she mentioned in the last chapter. And it's hard not to see that. It's not that sequential time doesn't have its purpose. It does. So it's not we're not trying to say that sequential time is delusional and you're not supposed to deal with that. That's not true. But enlightenment is also not separate from delusion. That we judge. We actually judge delusion as being bad and enlightenment being good. Yet another construct that is not operable in this practice, because they're also not separate. So any idea that you have of enlightenment is wrong. It's just, if you, and you know, the sutra, we don't chant it here very often, but in the sutra, the identity of relative and absolute, if you, what's the line about it? If you do not see it even as you walk on it. You are this enlightenment. You are this walking. You are this embodiment of enlightenment. And if you're looking for it to be somewhere or someplace else or some other time, or at some point in, that you didn't have it in the past that you will have in the future, that misses the point. Because the Buddha was really quite clear in his pronouncement: all beings have the wisdom of the Tathagata. All. It's not they're going to get it. They didn't have it then, and they're going to get it at some point in the future. It's all right now. It's always been there. You have this. You don't sit. We don't do this practice to become enlightened. We do this practice because we are enlightened, and that's the hardest thing to do, because we think that all the striving we do is going to make us better, and in some sense it does. That's not. I think it's a good thing to commit yourself to some practice of some kind. That is not a bad thing. But the idea that you're going to get something as a result, a certificate of enlightenment, if you will, the Academy Award, is not going to happen.
Why? So, on one hand, you say, any idea you have of enlightenment is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you say we sit because we are enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are those two both true?
Well, because all beings are enlightened.
What does that mean, though? I mean,
That
but what does that mean?
it means that all beings are enlightened.
But what does that mean if we don't have if any idea of enlightenment is wrong?
Yeah,
Then what does it mean?
it has no meaning, and that's the hard part. Is that it's meaningless.
Well,
It's empty.
It sounds like you're describing an experience. So, of course, experience doesn't have a meaning because you're dealing with the difference between reality versus a conception of reality.
Right. So, experience always precedes concept. 100%. You touch a stove, your body's going to react to that stove before your brain has a chance to register that it's hot. It's like, ow, then, oh yeah, hot. That these ideas that we have are late to the party. So that the experience is this immediate life, just as it is.
So then would enlightenment be awareness then? Just simply awareness?
Awareness is one aspect of enlightenment, but in the Heart Sutra it says no awareness. So what is that?
No awareness?
It says,
says
yeah,
that?
it's before awareness.
Okay.
Precept, before perception. If you're going to describe some idea of if you're going to try to conceptualize some idea of enlightenment, it's this immediate absorption into this now, so that you're not even thinking about whether you're enlightened or not. You were just taking care of everything that's right in front of you right now. That's the enlightened being. This trying to become something, again, not a bad thing, but it's not. But you're trying to become something that you already have, that you already do, that you already are, that is happening right here and this time. It's not some future aspect of yourself.
Is there a difference between realization and enlightenment?
I don't think so. But both of those are ideas.
So yeah, I've heard people say that he was a realized teacher, but not necessarily enlightened.
Well, I don't know, people probably have some idea of what that means to them, but you're not gonna find a definition of that anywhere. A realized teacher could be just, someone who's done the work, who's put in the work to study whatever it is they're teaching. So you can be teaching anything, so.
They have the quality stamp.
And there is this, and we do have this credentialing process, if you will, in Zen.
Oh, you have to, because some people are weak nuts, and
Yeah. So we do,
and some people are,
right.
you
So-
have to separate the two, both of the weak nut and the other guy can have the same experience, but you don't want the weak nut out there, talking about flying off buildings and stuff like that.
Yeah, but you will
Because it's
always,
possible.
you'll always have the wing nuts. There's no way to get rid of the crazy.
Right. You need a sorting.
But I think that, certainly, there is a credentialing process within the Soto school of Zen. And that, I'm in that process. So, Tenshin Roshi has come through that process and is now passing on. So that's the Dharma lineage that we have. And the certification of teachers that we have in our school. So yes, there is this certification, if you will.
But doesn't having a certification essentially require a person meets certain standards or objectives?
Yes.
And if those standards or objectives have no meaning, then what are they attaining? What are they attaining exactly?
They, you could put that in, a million different ways. In one sense, you hope that the person because basically what's happening in that process is someone is watching you work, watching how you operate in life, and if your behavior comports to the particular standards as described, there are standards, there are rules that were to be followed by the Sangha since Buddha's time. There were 250 odd rules in the Vinaya, and now we have 16 precepts. So that, certainly, yes, there is this expectation of a behavioral standard that we want teachers to meet. But does that always work? No.
Well, there's behavioral standards, but there's also sort of awareness standards or awakening standards. Like you have to reach a certain.
Yeah, but you can always see, but there's no way to measure that. No one can be inside you and tell someone else how aware you are. There's no objective way of saying this person has 80% awareness, this person has 90% awareness, this person over here only has 40% awareness. There's no objective measure for that. There is how it shows up in the world, how it shows up in your behavior, in your everyday activity, and where you spend your time, where you contribute your talents, or how you contribute your talents. But there's no objective measure of realization or awareness or enlightenment, because it's not a thing. It's just it is the expression of you as you are right now. And if indeed we believe the Buddha, then there's no one that's left out of that. Now, the Buddha did have a caveat to that statement. All beings have the wisdom of the Tathagata, but for our upside down thinking, we don't realize it. So someone who maintains their upside down thinking, and I consider upside down thinking any thinking that creates separation as a mode of perceiving things, that is constantly othering in some way, is probably, that's the upside down thinking, that they haven't done the work to uninvert their thinking. So there is that work that does do that. I mean, this practice is counterproductive, counterintuitive in that sense, and that it really isn't getting something as much as it is taking away your ideas of anything at all. And so once you drop this idea of, first of all, yourself, then you begin to operate. in a world in which you are inextricably one with. That takes some effort, because how many people do you know that don't walk around with their egos thoroughly intact, if not constantly being reinforced by where they are, what they do, and how they operate in life. And you have the extremes, the narcissists in the world who really can't see beyond their own self as they have constructed it. So there's nothing wrong with doing the work. We do have to do the work, but the work doesn't get you anything. It just takes away the idea that you don't already have it. So you strip, it's the peeling of the onion, and that metaphor is used a lot in Zen. The more you sit, the more you peel away that which stops you from seeing your own awareness, your own enlightenment, that it's already there. It's not something that you had to, that was magically absorbed from somebody else. It was something that you already have, and that does, sometimes, for me, working with teachers that have guided me through that process, I think is necessary, because some people have these breakthroughs and don't know what to do with that energy, because it's so, they're instantly unveiled, everything is removed. I guess like a psychedelic experience, that you are suddenly thrust into this world of what you think is reality, and you have no idea how to operate in that world in that way. And so they do things like, oh, I'm just free. There's no meaning. There's nothing that I need to do, and then all the guardrails are gone, and they do stuff without the guardrails, and oftentimes get themselves and others into trouble, as we have seen many times, in our own lineage. So there do have to be some guardrails, and some rules, and some guidance, and some effort put into how this realization manifests. But all that is just how we operate safely and helpfully in our society, in our world. That doesn't take away from the fact that enlightenment, everyone has already got this. Everyone is already enlightened. Everyone already has this from the very beginning. The Buddha said it, as soon as he was born, and got up and walked his 7 paces with all the rose petals raining down from heaven. I alone am the world honored one. But this I was without this selfish world. He said, I am the world. That is the world honored one. Without the separation, and all beings have the wisdom. Because I think that you do see this. I mean, just despite the fact that I see these rather troubled people in my office on a daily basis. If you talk to them long enough, or let them talk, I've learned to listen more than talk. If I let them talk long enough, they eventually talk themselves out of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Or you ask questions.
Yeah, I just ask leading questions. So, and even those people that are sitting in front of me because they're being accused of something, and if I just let them tell their story, they'll end up admitting to what it is they did, and realize in that conversation, oh, okay, I get it now.
Some people have wisdom that's just buried under a lot of our experiences.
Yes.
And our knowledge.
Yeah.
So, but it's not everybody is enlightened.
Yeah, no, that's true. Everybody is enlightened, but it's buried.
Okay. But they're just not using their enlightenment tool very well.
Well,
Because there's a lot of people that are walking around that are not enlightened.
Well, they're behaving out of their upside down thinking.
Yeah, out of their nature. So.
Right. But that upside down thinking is also not separate from enlightenment. So trying to separate all this stuff, it doesn't work. Anything.
Well, it actually does work, because we can actually walk across the street, we can know whether it's sunny or not.
Well, it has a
we can
purpose.
drive our car, so just saying that everything is emptiness is kind of like, well, okay, yeah, but so what?
Well, but emptiness is not.
We're all, you know, on the Planck scale, we're all just quantum fluctuations, and yeah, well, that's not the world we actually live in.
Yeah, but the teaching doesn't say that everything is emptiness. It says that emptiness is form and form is emptiness. So you have to have both. You have to have the relative and the absolute. You can't have one without the other. So that's trying to, you know, people who live in this world where everything is emptiness, that's delusional. And people who live in the world where everything is just form or just relative, also delusional. Those two are not separable. So when you can't live in the world, effectively you can, because people do, and they're messing up the world. So as a result of either living in one extreme or the other, and saying that they're not, that only that exists. The relative is not the only thing that exists. The absolute is not the only thing that exists. Relative and absolute are the foot before. I keep, you know, quoting the same sutra. The foot before, the foot behind, and walking, they are inextricably together, inextricably not separable. And the same thing that, you know, Dogen's trying to get across in time, and also this swallowing up and spitting out, getting rid of this idea that enlightenment is something separate from what you are right now, is where that's the Vermilion Palace that we keep trying to build around this idea of enlightenment. And when I get to that wonderful place, I'll be residing out of the Vermilion Palace. And there is no Vermilion Palace. There's no place, any perception that we have of enlightenment is not enlightenment. It's just an idea that we have about enlightenment.
No ETA.
There's no ETA. But there are the ETAs now.
Right.
You know, there's no separate time. So,
I was just gonna, you know, again, going back to the words of the Buddha, I mean, all he said is he's awake. You know, like he's asleep and then he woke up to his true nature. So, I mean, that's a beautiful analogy right there, is just, it's always there, but we're asleep. And then at one point, I mean, we're trying to wake up, and Zen is our practice to help us wake up. But I also think this, you know, idea, like you say, like, you know, the emptiness, you know, becoming awake, and then this other thing about living in form. I think it feels like, you know, Zen tends to emphasize the waking up. Doesn't always give us directions on how to live in form. You know, that aspect is not always emphasized.
Well, I think that's part of export Buddhism. You know,
No.
they tell the American what they
so
want to
let's
hear.
let me talk to that first.
And we don't go through the formal monastic forms and the hard work.
Well, you don't. Yeah, but you do.
And the 15 years of training in Asian schools, learning all the classical Chinese poetry and the formal Confucian ethics that is considered the basis of society. That's why in Japan you can leave your wallet on the floor and people don't steal it. So that's in the background. And when you export it to the United States, they don't have that background, and they think, well, we don't want to, we have in our mind the "thou shalt not" these rules. Oh, we don't need to learn that. I learned that in grammar school. That's nobody actually really practices that except Jesus or whatever, and we're missing a lot of the cultural context, which is the background, and that's firmly in them when they go through the training later in life. And that's kind of like, we want to have the cake and we don't want to do the hard work down here.
Sounds like you're agreeing with me.
If you're training at a formal Zen center like Yokoji,
Yeah.
all the forms are there. People don't like them and are resistant to them, but that's what morning service practices, that's what work practices, all of those are forms. So, and they are part of training. And that's, that's still very much intact in American Zen. It's different because we're not Chinese and we're not Japanese. So we are growing the American forms because it's been relatively, been in the States a relatively short period of time as opposed to the 2,000 years it's been in the Asian countries. But
The forms are different, but the formlessness is not. That's the same throughout.
It
The
is.
form is always gonna be different from culture to culture.
Right.
And we just adjust to it. But then the formlessness is the formlessness. That's the integration. So with whatever form you are, whether you're Japanese, Chinese, or American,
Right.
you're the form.
And there was no-
practice those.
there was no central school that prescribed the forms. There's never been a central school that prescribed the forms for the Zen temples. Those forms changed depending on which monastery you were in, and which school of Buddhism you were practicing. So that has never been controlled by any central process. We do have a Soto Zen school out of Japan that has a prescribed curriculum, if you will, that a lot of the American centers, especially Kenshin, who does not want to make it into a Japanese temple, he has rejected. So he's created a form. He's created forms, because there are several, that work at Yokoji. And Maizumi Roshi created forms, even though he was from that Japanese school. He created forms in as much as he knew how that worked at Zen Center in Los Angeles. Now he was very steeped in a lot of the Japanese forms, so he did bring that a lot, and we have inherited a lot of those forms, and we continue that. I mean, starting with the various sutras and how we do morning service, those forms are still there. But the forms are an inextricable part of the formlessness of Zen. Yes.
Yeah, I guess I would say, I just say, maybe it's, you have to find the forms also that, that work for you, right, that you need, right? So like some of the forms might be, okay, your health isn't very good. So what kind of forms do you introduce into your life that support your health? Maybe you're dealing with shadow issues. Your meditation is starting to bring up the shadow in you. What forms now are available to deal with those shadow issues? Mm-hmm. So I think, the forms are definitely important. And I guess the question is, are the right forms in place to deal with the experiences that a student needs to deal with? And I think everybody's trying to answer that for themselves, right? I think every school is trying to find the right forms that work for the students who are participating in that.
Well, that sort of individualistic point of view is very Western and was never a consideration of the Asian schools.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I missed
I
that.
said that individualistic perspective is very American.
Very American?
Yeah, it's certainly in when you get to, because the Asian cultures are more group oriented, family oriented. They don't think of themselves as much as individuals as we do, as we have. Now they've unfortunately taken that on, and I think somewhat to their detriment. But we've always been these Western cowboys. We're all out here on our own, thinking that we're designing, but we are herd animals. We exist, in a group, and so that's what Sangha is that you do what works for the community. The idea that we do have this idea of this Western idea. We're figuring out how that works with Zen, but Zen comes out of communal cultures, not individualistic cultures. So it's now hit the West, and that there's some clash with that, because you see this all the time, that people kind of blow out of the Zen Center because this isn't right for me. I'm like, okay, that's that's not the point. The point is, you don't live in the world by yourself. You live in the world as a community. And in LA, or we're in Orange County at the moment, a block away from LA. There's a community of 13 million people in which you have to deal with. And us trying to impose our individualistic ideas of what works and what doesn't always work for the community, And so part of the work is really, that's part of the first part of the work is, if we study the self, there's only one way that goes. We forget self.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're truly embodying who you are as the self, you eventually will drop away that whole idea of the self, that I have to do what's best for me. That is not to say you don't take care of yourself, because taking care of yourself is also something you do not only for yourself but for the community. And I truly believe, put your own oxygen mask on first if you are to assist others to breathe. And the sentient being that you have to save first is yourself before you can save anybody else. But that self is not separate from the rest of the community. I think that we take a different approach to Zen in the West than the Eastern cultures did, because they are automatically part of a community, because there are just so many of them. There have always been a lot of them, especially in India and China. Despite moving up to remote areas, they still moved up there in community. These monasteries were large communities, some of them, not all of them. Still communal, and still it was the community that came first in their mindset.
I was going to say, this movie I was watching last night, The 13th Samurai. So the guy who was kind of giving this speech to the warriors who was going to take on this mission, he could say, you can either live like a dog and serve yourself, or you can, be part of the group and, die for the cause. We take this mission, we sacrifice our lives to the mission.
Yeah.
So one is very group oriented, where you sacrifice the self for the mission of the group, right? Whatever that group is or whatever that mission is, versus the idea of like living like a dog. So I guess maybe in the Westerns, we have a hard time with giving up that dog life.
Yeah. Well, dogs usually travel in packs. So
I don't know. Maybe the bad quote. I don't
They
know.
got along with humans because we just supported one part of the pack for some of them.
Yeah. So I think that metaphor is a little strained.
Maybe a mistranslation or something.
But I think of this, almost in terms of a process. Am I in a process that I think is, reflective of moving towards, whatever you want to call it, enlightenment, awareness, whatever that is. I don't know what that is, but I know, if we're ridding ourselves of those things that are keeping us from being our true nature, then I think that's enough. I don't need to be any more than that.
No.
Nor can I actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a really good book by Richard Gombrich. Richard Gombrich was the head of Oxford for the South Indian Sanskrit department for many years. And he has a book called What the Buddha Taught. And it's really good. And his idea that, and which made sense for me because, I worked in systems engineering. He described the philosophy as processual. You're part of a process. You have all these causes and conditions coming in, and you're acting on them to produce actions. And you're working on this. You're a process rather than a certain state or a thing or an idea. that's and putting it in modern systems engineering vocabulary just makes total sense. And it gets around this, well, it's not this and it's not that. Well, yeah, well, if you have an idea what a process and a system is and how they work, you know, you have inputs, you have resources, you have the, you know, like the five skandhas, the
Senses.
that make up the individual. Yeah, it makes sense. So,
We can learn a lot from artificial intelligence. I mean, that's what we're doing, right?
Well,
It's all of the process.
I'm not sure who's doing what.
for a couple of years.
Well,
until
well,
we're
I mean, yeah,
replaced.
that's the thing, right?
As it turns
It's
out.
improving on itself, right?
Yeah,
The,
yeah, they're
algorithms.
self-learning, yeah, it's just,
But let's not forget that human beings created artificial intelligence.
Right.
It didn't create itself.
But it's now, it's now
taking on a life of its own.
right.
Right.
well, our parents created us too,
Yeah.
so I mean, we're learning from them, the environment and our internal, you know, hardware, and we're getting this information, incorporating it and changing that way, so
Yeah.
eventually it's catching up pretty damn fast.
Yeah.
Too fast.
Yeah. And we're definitely living in, you know, interesting times, as the Chinese curse says. And it's a time when things are changing so rapidly that
Yeah.
that people are stressed by the amount of change.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the reactions we're seeing from these groups that appear to be polarized is a reaction to just a lot of rapid change. So the 20th century saw the greatest amount of change ever before in history, and the 21st century is, you know, unfolding much the same way. So I think at some point we'll get back in balance with it. We'll get used to it, but we're not in this point. We're out of balance, and which is creating this dissonance that we have with our reality. So part of what Zen, the purpose of Zen has always been to bring people into equanimity, into, you know, this equipoise relationship with reality, which has been difficult to do, you know, I think in these modern times. But you know, I've never lived in any other time, so I have no real comparison. And you know, who knows what it will be in the future? But right now, you know, in this time, as time coalesces in this particular moment, there's a lot of work to do to maintain that equanimity with our reality. And and Zen will do that for you. Zen, the Zazen, the sitting meditation, if you truly put yourself into it, truly sit down with intent and focus on your breathing, focus on your koan study, focus on this just sitting, that balance is still available no matter what's going on. And the balance is going on in the reality that is, not in the reality that we want it to be. And that's the counterintuitive part, because people think this vermilion palace is something other than where you are right now, and that's why it's kind of this delusion. This time, this place, these circumstances, right here, right now, are what's real, and how will you take care of that reality?
But when you say there's multiple realities all happening at the same time,
I never know.
no, I say that in terms of like the guy with the AK-47. That's his reality, you know, and that's happening. And at the same time, there's somebody who's, you know, on a boat for Greenpeace trying to save the whales, you know, and that's a reality too that's happening at the same time. So I'm not saying like reality is different. Like, I mean, it's all happening at the same time, but
Right.
within the texture, the weaving of society, you have these very different places where people are operating from.
Well, you have different circumstances in which those are operating. Now, certainly that AK-47 being taken to an elementary school is a different story than being used in a war that's where you're trying to fight for hopefully something good.
A just war.
Or just war. You know, so that same gun, you know.
There is such a thing.
I don't know. We could be here for the next several lifetimes debating that. But I'm just saying that, you know, we have to take care of the circumstances the best way we know how in those circumstances. Shooting up a bunch of six-year-olds, I don't know how that's going to help your cause. You know, that person's, I don't know what that reality is for a person who thinks that's necessary.
Mental illness, I think you would have to say.
Yeah, and we've allowed people with that reality to legally buy guns. But certainly there is a time. There's obviously there's a time and a place for everything, and I don't know who am I to judge, any of that. But I do have to, whatever happens, I have to take care of it. That's the job. That's the vow that I take as a bodhisattva. Whether that AK-47 is being used appropriately or inappropriately, I now have to take care of the circumstances that arise from the use of that gun, as it presents itself to me. So, because the reaction ripples out. Sandy Hook, people were so upset in California, 3,000 miles away, that we had to get help for people. We had to take care of that. And that's the reality of what compassion calls for.
Well, that happened once in Australia 25 years ago or so. They changed the laws, and it didn't happen since. In the U.S.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into a debate about it. So the topic is Uji, being time.
We're hijacking this topic.
I know. So how are you going to take care of the reality and circumstances that you are in right here and right now? That's the only thing that Dogen is trying to get us to recognize. It's not, we don't have to wait until we get to some idea of enlightenment. We are already there. We already have the capacity to take care of what's right in front of us. So do that instead of trying to be something else or be some time, some other place or some other time. If not who? If not me, then who? If not now, then when? So it's all now.
You're quoting Palau.
Yeah. So that's really all this is getting to is stop coming up with delusional ideas of what reality is. Take care of it.
I mean, the beauty of it is that you start from where you are. Everyone has that ability, and that's that's all that really matters is that you take up the practice.
Plus, they say that sometimes reality sort of smacks you in the face.
Yeah.
If you're really not.
Yeah. If you're not,
you have some kind of delusional thinking, or any kind of delusional thinking, or social thinking, political thinking.
Yeah, or sometimes you were just surprised by reality. Even if you have the best intentions, you're taking care of reality, then something enters that reality that disrupts, a car accident. You're driving down the road doing the speed limit, which is not me. And some car, we have no control over that other person's circumstances, but now reality has just slapped you in the face. Not that you weren't paying attention.
Right. But the guy you hit or hit you might come up and say something completely different.
Maybe.
And that's his reality. Then
maybe
that could be
you had
his
that reality, Mark. Didn't they blame you for that?
Yeah.
That could. The problem I have is there's some sort of subjective aspect of reality that people seem to have different perspectives on reality.
Yeah.
Conditioning or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's the idea, that people have.
Say,
of
Mark,
reality.
the guy says it's your fault, Mark, and Mark didn't,
Yeah.
it wasn't. But that guy's, perhaps believed it.
Yeah.
Well-
I mean, the event is that two cars collided, happened. The story we make up
Yeah,
about that
that's true.
is always after the fact.
Well, then there's, then there's how dishonesty plays into all that too, right?
Right.
She knew she was wrong. She knew what she did. I mean, it was a red light. There's no issue about it. She didn't have a reality. There was a green light. She knew exactly what she did. And I was watching Amistad last night, the story of the slave trip.
I'm stuck, yeah.
That's
Sorry,
great.
Yeah.
And
I saw it, right?
they're having a trial, and one side clearly knows they're lying to the court. They just believe they can get away with it. The Spaniards from Cuba, because they want this cargo of slaves, but they clearly know they didn't come from Cuba. They clearly know they came from Africa
Yeah.
on another ship. But everybody's in court, so I mean, it's not. You can't really say that everyone's reality is equal because they don't even believe their reality. He's not the one they're putting out there. Their reality is they want these slaves.
Yeah.
Period.
Right. The reality is they're going to lie to you to get whatever they want.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's,
And so there's that,
That's-
which you and I both encounter in our jobs.
yeah. Well, there will always be trouble.